this was part of the Perseverance DX group. The Perseverance DX group was formed after the 2012 Campbell Island expedition. It's named after the harbor, Perseverance Harbor, and this is it's an LLC Corp that offers us some liability protection in case something goes wrong. And these are a lot of the expeditions that we have done. So here's the team. 16 operators from 6 different countries. These expeditions normally are 50-50 in terms of contributions. The operators normally put up 50% of the funds for these expeditions, and you guys with your donations, the foundations, pick up the other half. And that's normally how these expeditions work. Since Bouvet, we call it the Bouvet effect, the money has significantly dried up. And I think a lot of it is it was $1 million operation and folks were a bit disappointed. Hence, we believe that it really sort of hurt funding for every other expedition that followed. This expedition in particular cost us $380,000. So Gene, K5GS, and Steve, W1SRD, signed a contract for $380,000. Most of it was to pay for the boat before we even started this operation, right? This is all part of the planning. So they put their necks on the line for almost $400,000. So just to give you an idea of what these types of projects entail, a lot of risk. This was a very, very experienced team. We only had 2 newbies on the team. This individual here, as you can see, is Francesco. You know him. He is the owner and operator of the Vatican radio station, Hotel Victor Zero Alpha. Good friend of mine, Francesco. And this is Andreas, N6NU. He was primarily our satellite operator and 6-meter op. All of the equipment was his that he brought to the island. And you'll see his setup as we go through. But when we left port, when we left San Diego, only 40% of the expenses had been covered. So when we left port, the entire team, had we not activated this island, we would have had to have come up with the rest of the money. So very, very expensive and risky endeavor for everybody involved. So why did we do Clipperton? It was the top 50 most wanted. As you can see over here, it was number 38 most wanted in the world and 26 for Europe. It had been 11 years since we last activated, or since Clipperton Island had been activated. FT8 and 60 meters had never been activated from Clipperton, so that was another sort of big motivation. And the most important was that we could get a permit to land on Clipperton Island. It was the highest DXCC entity that the PDXG group could essentially get the required permits and land, the landing permits and radio license. So this is as best we could do in the time frame. And if you take a look at this picture here, we originally planned to land in the southeast corner of the island, down here. We planned to set up 2 stations about 1,500 feet apart. One was going to be a CW camp with 5 radios, and the other was going to be an SSB camp with 5 radios. That way we could both be on 20 meters at the same time and get more coverage. Plus we'd have 8 to 9 stations up and running, okay? So that was the original plan. Remember I said get ready for, be prepared for any possibility. The other thing that was interesting about this expedition was that several of our team members had been on the 2012 expedition prior. So we had a lot of intel as to what we could expect when we got on the island. So where is Clipperton and reference to San Diego. You take a look at this picture. San Diego is roughly, I'd say probably about 1,700 miles south of San Diego. And this is our track that we took with the boat with our little Garmin, doing little droppings along the way. And it's about 1,300 miles from Mexico on that graph there. One of the interesting things about Clipperton is it's important to the French for several reasons. If you take a look at their 200 nautical mile exclusion zone around the island, it's rich with fishing resources, tuna, you name it, very, very rich fisheries. And so as fishing resources diminish due to overfishing, its nations are becoming more protective of their possessions. And so the French essentially made this a marine preserve, and you really shouldn't be there unless you've got permission. And trust me, they've got satellites looking at everything that goes on, as you will find out in this presentation. So this is a little bit, you guys can read about the history, but Clipperton is essentially the remnants of an extinct volcano with a coral atoll built on top of it. It's an uninhabited island. The lagoon is completely enclosed from the ocean. So it's rainwater fills the lagoon, as well as when there are hurricanes that go by, dumps salt water into it as well. So it's a very brackish lagoon. And with the amount of birds that's there, you mix in a little bit of guano as well. We were basically warned not to swim in this thing, nor drink the water. The island is about 6 square miles, and it takes about just under 2 hours to walk around the whole thing. And the highest point on this island is 10 to 12 feet above sea level. So big storms coming through, as you'll see, covers the entire island. And there is a landing strip located right here in the northwest corner of the island. It's actually in pretty good shape, but our landing permit said we can't use it. So airplane landing is not allowed. Look at this. This is the predicted climate for the island in January and February. Look at the high, 83 degrees. And the low, 67. Mighty comfortable, wouldn't you say? 7 miles an hour is the wind speed. And about the same for February. Well, guess what happened when we landed? 97 degrees almost every day. Look at the high, 104 degrees. Look at the humidity, 88%. Today it was 57 at that moment. The other thing that, you notice anything strange with this picture? Look at the top of the power supply. The average wind speed on this island during the duration of our stay was about 20 miles an hour. So you've got blowing sand and very, very fine particles being blown all over the place. It was sandy, dusty everywhere. When you would walk around at night with your headlamp, you would see what appeared to be diamond flakes flying by. And I'll share this with you guys. I haven't mentioned it before, but one of our ops now has basically, there was so much damage done to his eyes, he has to put eye drops in every day, multiple times a day, because it feels gritty. And so that was one of the consequences of Clipperton Island. It was, I'm sure my lungs are filled with a lot of silica. I want to talk a little bit about the landing permit that took us a long time. If it wasn't for Philippe, FO4BM, we would have never obtained a landing permit for Clipperton Island. He is the administrator of Clipperton Island, also a ham radio operator, and Clipperton at the time was administered out of Tahiti. And so he went to the map for us in terms of obtaining license and the landing permit. Note the terms of the conditions, the terms and conditions suggested that a French national be the lead. So we have our good friend Jackie that you guys all know, F2CW, and it's a ZL, I think ZL2 CW as well. Jackie is both carries both a New Zealand passport as well as a French passport. He was the team lead. We also recruited several French nationals, but the price tag was a bit too high, so they ended up declining the offer to be part of the team. And they also required us to be have bona fide scientific content. And then the other point I want to make is take a look at this statement. Basically, they're reminding us that we could die on this island and there's nobody around to help us. And so that was the terms that we agreed to prior to leaving. And so we knew the landing was going to be tough. This is the reef. There is a fringing reef out here that is about 50 yards away from the beach, the sand. And this is where it actually breaks. The waves break right at the edge of the reef. One thing that you don't see in this picture is all the way to the edge of the reef, reef, it's knee-high or less. It's very, very shallow. So some of the problems that you'll see in this video of us landing is that the boat comes in and they basically have to get the motor out of the water or else they're going to bottom out. And in fact, one of our skips initially, when the crew was trying to figure out how to get us on the island, two of the skiffs overturned and we lost some of the initial equipment that we brought over, including my bowfangs that we were going to use to communicate. So yeah, it was rough. We talked about the scientific content. We brought 3 guests along, 2 scientists, Anthony and Patrick here. Anthony is from the University of Polynesia in Tahiti, and his buddy Patrick from the University of Orléans, and lives in France. Both of these individuals were on the previous 2012 expedition to Clipperton Island. And what they wanted to understand was Anthony and Patrick both studied the rat population and crab population on the island. There was a shipwreck that brought in the rats, and we were warned there were going to be millions of rats and millions of crabs, and we had to be prepared for it. They came to investigate to see what had happened in the last 11 years since they were there. The other individual is Jean-Francois. This guy, if you saw him sleeping at night, he'd have this smile. I just remember Jean as like, he was always happy. He was a lifetime obsession with Clipperton. He knew the history. This guy was a fanatic on the island, and he was there trying to figure out how could the French take advantage of this natural beauty. So yeah, it was, this was our scientific content. So where does it all start? It starts with equipment prep, right? We know that we've got the landing permit, we've got the license. We met at Walt's house, N6XG, tested everything. We set up the stations, we set up the network, we set up N1MM logging. We planned for 3 days of emergency food and water. You remember the Bouvet guys landed and couldn't get off? Well, one of our requirements was we needed to get the food, the 2 or 3 days of food and water and equipment on the island before the first person, landed, set foot. So that's what I call, talk about with the planning process. What was really nice about this expedition is we did not have to ship our equipment overseas. The boat that we used was the Shogun. It was based out of San Diego. Walt lives in Los Altos Hills, very close to Stanford University near San Francisco. And so basically we took the equipment, loaded it onto a truck, and drove it down to the boat and loaded the boat. So we didn't have to ship our equipment overseas. So here is the packing party. And we had, I think it was a 26-foot U-Haul, and this thing was pretty much filled all the way to the tailgate there. The next day after we were done loading the U-Haul, Doris, Steve, Walt, here, and Andreas. So here's Walt, Andreas, here's Steve and his wife Doris, drove the U-Haul down to San Diego. Here we are. The U-Haul has arrived to the wharf, the boat. The crew of the boat, as well as some of the dock workers, unloaded the equipment from the U-Haul and brought it down to essentially the wharf where the Shogun was berthed. So here's a picture. This is just of our coax. We had miles of coax, 9 antennas, 2 different stations, 2 different, camps, if you wish. Here are 4 or 5 8-kilowatt generators, Generacs. This is Jackie, our lead. Ton of gear. So as you can see, the equipment gets stacked up here, staged on the dock, and all of us are basically trying to load the boat of our gear, and at the same time, they're prepping the boat with food. Here's the Shogun. It's primarily a sport fishing boat. They have no experience with DXpeditions. Having been on the Braveheart multiple times, the Braveheart pretty much knew what they were doing, right? They knew how to get us on these islands. One of the big things that the Braveheart had was they had a custom boat built with a jet engine so that basically it could go in very, very shallow water and not damage the motor. And as you see in our expedition, we've got these outboards that are sticking down about a foot below the bottom of the boat. And that was some of the challenges that the Shogun faced. So there's really a significant difference in terms of the charter boat. So here we are loading. As you can see, there's food everywhere. Think about it. There are 5 crew members, 16 operators, 3 scientists, and we're on this boat for a month. So you can imagine how much food is required to feed us. And here's Dustin, Dustin's wife, who was our chef. And we also had a baby in a box. And they hung out with us the entire day as we're loading the boat because we're leaving the next morning. So it was really nice to meet her. As is customary with every expedition, we have a team dinner. And here we are lined up. It was a beautiful restaurant overlooking the harbor. So here we are. It's a short video of us leaving the Shogun's berth, and we're all pretty excited.
Yeah. Take a little movie and then
a little movie. I will. We are leaving.
I'm so excited.
What time are we off? 9:35.
9:35. We're gonna go get fuel now, right?
Yeah. We're just gonna go over the fuel deck.
Adios, amigo. Thank you.
See you in a month.
Yeah, in a month.
Here's a card. He gave us a card. Bye.
Man, I didn't bring my cell phone.
Your cell phone? Yeah.
Please, no, it's inside. Please forward.
Yeah, I will. We all share. What happens is we put it all on a.
So as you can see, everybody's very happy. We're thrilled. We're starting our adventure. Here we are getting our gas tanks, 50-gallon drums filled with fuel. We had probably eight 8-kilowatt generators. We were out for bear. And it was probably took about an hour and a half. I can't remember the number, but it was ridiculous how much fuel this boat took. And I mean, it was, in the tens of thousands of gallons of diesel to power the ship. So here we are. This is Steve saying goodbye to Doris, his wife. These guys have been married for about 100 years and they're still like newlyweds. So I included a picture of the final goodbye of these guys. It was kind of cute. So here's what life aboard the Shogun was like. As you can see, the food's been put away. All our equipment's been stowed. Every single seat here, every nook and cranny of this boat is stuffed with food. Probably several times a day, the cook would come by and say, please move, I've got to go get a can of whatever. And so we were constantly having to get up as Dustin fed us. Here's what our cabins look like. Here we got three bunks. We got a sink. We had power outlets. We were living the good life. We could charge our phones. We could charge our Garmins. It was actually a lot way nicer than the Braveheart conditions. So I want to tell you a little bit about our chef. Here's Dustin. About a month before COVID hit, Dustin opened a 5-star restaurant. It obviously did not survive. Dustin has now accepted a job on the Shogun as the chef. But needless to say, we were happy about that because this guy could cook. So here is our lunch, breakfast, dinner schedule. 2 egg sausages, potatoes, English muffin, a chicken burger. Even looking at this, I'm full, right? And so over here, you see a picture of creme brulee, right? Here is a little lobster, some steak, mashed potatoes, gravy, and some corn. So life was good. I forgot to tell you about the pre-breakfast snack. So here we got some oatmeal. We've got some berries, right? Blueberries and some raspberries, brown sugar, some granola, some yogurt, and some fruit. And in case you were feeling kind of bad, you could have some M&Ms and some Twix, and a couple oranges, some cereal, and some chips. That was our pre-breakfast snack. And you've got breakfast. There's an omelet with some potatoes. And guess what? Mid-morning snack. Want a little pizza, right? Here's our lunch. Remember, this is a sport fishing boat. Young men in their 20s and early 30s, they're working all day, they're hungry. Food kept coming. Midday snack. Who wants a little quesadilla with some tomatoes and lettuce and some guacamole? And then dinner. Some steak, or some, what is it, cheesecake with some topping. Needless to say, this went on for about 2 days until we said, Dustin, enough is enough. We can't eat this food. And they were a little disappointed because, you know, they've never seen a bunch of old men that don't eat that much, right? So we operated Maritime Mobile. One of the interesting things about this is we brought a K4 with us. Elecraft donated some equipment, K4 and KPA 1500s, to this expedition. A lot of the ops had never seen a K4. And so this gave the operators a chance to play with the radio prior to us getting on the island. And here's the card if you happen to work us Maritime Mobile. This is the antenna. We had a 4BTV vertical on top of a grappling hook mounted in the stern of the boat. So here's an idea of what life was like. It was rough. So this is a little sample of eating. I mean, for you guys that were in the Navy, you're probably accustomed to it. Okay. And he didn't even have the midday snack. So needless to say, rough seas, a lot of guys were sick. But we're trying to eat without spilling. And if you look closely at the boat, there's soup all the way to the edge, right? It was interesting. We won't bore you with the rest, but super, super rough seas. No sooner do we leave port, what does the crew of a sport fishing boat do? They toss lines overboard.
Look at that. Yeah.
Tuna. A lot of tuna all the way down and on the island.
Beautiful.
A lot of tuna. So much tuna, even caught yellowfin. Right? For those of you in this room here that love sushi, you should have come with us. Look at all this fish. We had fresh sushi. I don't like the stuff. I like my stuff cooked. But people were gouging themselves on this yellow tuna. Somebody was saying that it was like a $300, $400 meal. And these guys, the crew was just absolutely thrilled. While we were on the island, they had brought lobster traps. So we were eating lobster. They were catching it for us, and we were eating lobster as well. One of the things during this rough voyage was the amazing sunrise and sunsets. Incredible. So here we are, first view of Clipperton Island. After 8 days of a hellish ride down, many of us were sick. We all had patches, and some of that didn't help. The surf was pounding when we arrived, so much so, it took us 2 days for the captain to lap the island while we're on this boat trying to figure out how to land us on this island. We intended, like I showed you before, on that southeastern corner. The captain decides he can't do that. We're going to land on the southwest corner. And so that sort of threw our plans out the door, because now we're in a different location that we don't know a whole lot about. So again, I talked about that stratified water where it's sort of fresh water at the top, but as you go down, it becomes more and more acidic. Jacques Cousteau did a presentation on this island, and basically it's so acidic down below that the paint on their air tanks had basically started peeling off. So super, super acidic below. It has something to do with the rocks, the calcification of the rocks, the guano, the salt water. Basically, you know, avoid this lagoon as best you can. So talked a little bit about the skiffs. So these are our 3 aluminum skiffs. The motor's about a foot below the bottom of the boat. So some of the initial problems we had was when the captain essentially found an opening in the reef that was about 10 to 15 feet wide. So the boat, they could get the boat in, but as soon as it crosses that reef, they got to pull the motor out. But then the waves are trying to take them out to sea, et cetera. So it was a real difficult, very difficult landing. So here's the first landing. This is our Jackie, our project lead. They're heading out to sea. The landing was so difficult that we had no choice, that as soon as the team landed on the island, we couldn't get off. We were basically on the island for the duration of the expedition because it was too dangerous to come in and off. And so the crew would bring us the needed water, the food, our fuel, whatever we needed from the boat, the crew would deliver. But once we were on the island, everybody pretty much stayed. So this is an idea of how rough it is. So it took the Shogun crew several days to figure out how to land us safely. In the process, 2 of our skiffs overturned, and we lost a lot of gear to the salt water while they tried to figure it out. And so let me just quickly show you what they did. So remember, there's that 10 to 15 foot cut in the reef. So what they decided to do was they'd have 2 people at the edge of this cut. The boat would come in, and the 2 people standing in that on top of that shallow reef would grab the boat and basically walk it in the 50 yards. But it took them a while to figure out. So this is an idea of how rough it was. And this was a good day, not a bad day. And they're just trying to get this boat out. And notice there is another boat just beyond the reef as an emergency, in case something happens, it capsizes, he can pull people out of the water. And the other thing I haven't mentioned, this place is littered with sharks. They would come in to the reef looking for fish while we are out there, it was scary stuff. But it kind of gives you an idea of the difficulty getting in and getting off. So the window of opportunity for loading was in the morning at high tide. So we basically, most of our gear came in the morning, and then after that at the next high tide cycle. But it was only during daylight. Again, this crew had little experience. Look at this, is some of our equipment coming in. Look how low it is, right? And then look at these waves that are chasing it. So the Clipperton Moving Company. So this is us. They brought us ashore. We wait here at this beachhead. We had these little carts that had big fat tires. The crew delivered the equipment and supplies. The team would gather at the beachhead, load the gear, and haul it to camp 1,000 feet away. Here's our staging area. As you can see, we've got one tent up, sleeping tent, and is an emergency tent for the guys that were on the island. And we basically come and we start loading all of our gear here. Again, food's delivered multiple times a day. The first priority was to get the shelters up. The main tent is the operating tent, as you see here, that's getting built. The second tent was going to be our kitchen mess hall. Purchased some REI tents that sleep 2 to 3 individuals comfortably on cots and a sleeping bag. And here you can see the first 2 tents going up. Operating tent has been built. The kitchen tent going up next. As you can see, you've got a set of VDAs already up. So the first couple days, we made about 3,000 to 5,000 cues. It was just the guys at night when we couldn't build anything, got on the radio and made a few cues while we were setting it up. This took us 3 days to build out this camp. The other thing that we were a little bit concerned about initially were the VDAs, these vertical dipole arrays. They really need to be very close to salt water. And the problem with this lagoon, because of where he placed us, we are now shooting over freshwater. And we were concerned our VDAs would not work as well. And here you see second tent, more antennas built, the kitchen and mess hall built as well. And here we are, finally, all the sleeping tents have been built. One of the things I wanted to point out here is look at these little divots. You see them? Where people have essentially fallen through this crusty sand. What has happened is the crabs have burrowed underneath all of the sand. So as you come across one of their tunnels, you fall in, right? So within the first day, we realized there is no way we were going to be able to build the second camp because trying to get the equipment and move it 1,500 feet away was nearly impossible. And so we sort of gave up on that idea. And here's what the inside of the tent looks like. Remember, I talked about the cots. There's 3 of us, 2 here, 1, 2, and then across this backside is the third. We would store all our equipment underneath the cots. REI tents that stood up wonderfully to the rain and wind. Here's what the stations look like, the build out of the stations. This is 3 stations here, and then there were 2 more on the other side. And here it is up and running. As you can see, we had a Starlink satellite that gave us 24/7 internet service. It allowed us to do Club Log Live. We had a second Starlink for us to use to communicate with our families as well. So Starlink was a big, it sort of has changed DXpeditions because everybody now can be connected for relatively, I think our costs are about $200 a month, unlimited internet with this setup. Every operator got 2 4-hour shifts. So red is team A. They would operate from these hours. And every third day, everyone would sort of shift schedules. And what this allowed us to do is for the entire duration of the operation, every op had a chance to operate every hour of the day. So if you were a low band guy, you got your opportunity and everybody else did. The downside of this schedule is you're in perpetual jet lag mode because when you're not working, it's 100 degrees and you're having to try to find some sleep. Antennas need to be built. Generators needed to be fueled. Everybody's busy on top of that. So this is a picture of the A-team, my favorite photograph. for those of you that have not seen this presentation before, what's wrong with this picture? Can't tell? Is it that possibly that Rob's bald? No? I'm a CW operator. What's wrong with this picture? No headphones. So this is towards the end of the operation. We were 5,000 cues away from 100,000. The A team decides we're all going to do FT8 because that's the highest rate that we could possibly achieve. So all 5 of us decided to run FT8 that night. We did 4,900 cues in the 4-hour shift. We ended up 100 cues short of 100,000. So the next team shows up and within 10 minutes, they bust the record. But we really had fun making that happen. Again, I talked about sovereignty and how these possessions are so important to the countries that own them. So here is Jackie, F2CW, reaffirming French sovereignty. He plays the national anthem and he raises the flag. Once a year, a French destroyer or naval vessel visits Clipperton and does the same thing. So here, look at the birds. Littered with birds and crabs. And when these guys wake up at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, everybody's up. And imagine trying to install antennas and all that stuff while these guys are around. And trust me, you could tell the operators who did not look where they were going. Jackie in particular, his leg covered in blood because when these guys peck at you, they draw blood. So you really try to avoid them at all costs. One of the things I wanted to point out here is these VDAs. The VDAs are vertical dipole arrays. Think of it as a 2-element Yagi, but standing on end. Killer antennas. They're about a 10 to 11 dB gain by saltwater. Incredible antennas. So when we are by saltwater, that's the antenna of choice. Here's Clipperton Power and Light. Our generators are running. We needed a lot less fuel because we didn't have 2 camps. The biggest surprise that came out of this expedition was the fact that we brought along with us an electric fuel pump. What that allowed us to do was it allowed us to hot fuel these generators. We never had to shut them down because it was a slow enough rate that we could pop the top. You know, instead of trying to dump the fuel in, this little pump would just pump it in, and after 5 minutes, the generator's full, cap it, while it's all still running. Though, my friend Jay and I had a scary experience with this electric fuel pump on a different expedition, but you have to be careful. Everybody wants to know, where do you go to the bathroom on a deserted island? We dug a hole in the ground. This is the throne. We had the luxury of some plywood, a hole in the ground, and this is plastic bag here, toilet paper, in case it rains, doesn't get wet, right? Look at the view, $1 million view, right? What's the problem with this picture? Remember I told you the highest point was 10 to 12 feet above ground, above the ocean? This is the problem. Look at this path. This path here is 20 feet from the commode. So if you are the unlucky individual who's got to go to the bathroom and all your teammates are walking by, you can have a conversation with them. These are the tents here, so everybody can see you and who's on the throne. It is life, but for some of us who are fairly shy, we made sure we went in the dark. So here's Jackie operating, quite the character, a good friend of mine. Here's another view of the operation. We had lights in this operating tent as well as the kitchen, very, very well lit up with some LEDs, right? Beautiful picture. Here's the moon. It was really, really an interesting place, desolate, but interesting. Again, one day's dust, right? You can write your name on this equipment. And this is tens of thousands of dollars. My amplifiers and my K3s, all of this equipment was Elecraft well, it was our equipment. It was all Elecraft gear. Some of it was provided by Elecraft. Every single one of these transceivers and amplifiers got sent back to Elecraft for cleaning. It was about a $400 bill per radio per amp. Again, look at this stuff, right? Just incredible. And the interesting thing about these is that you couldn't blow it off. You couldn't wipe it off. It just stuck. So here's our 6-meter Andreas, who did 6-meter and EME satellite. Big time EME op. All of this stuff is his personal gear. He worked, I think, about 160, 170 contacts on EME. Made hundreds of, sat operators happy. We never really got that big 6-meter opening. I know several of my friends in the Midwest made it, but not a lot on the East Coast. But pretty much West Coast, Texas, Arizona, down south, as well as the Midwest. But he made Andreas one-man wrecking crew. I mean, truly phenomenal. Here he is with Arliss, our doctor, overlooking his shoulder. The one contribution that Andreas did to the software was he actually worked with the software company, much like you guys are all familiar with Foxhound, where you can have multiple contacts in one session, one 15-second interval. Andreas worked with the software company prior to coming on the island so that he could work multiple people as well. So that over a satellite pass helped a lot because he's doing multiple contacts each session. This is a custom-built 7-element 6-meter Yagi. What was interesting about this antenna was he used magnets instead of bolting the elements onto the boom. He put this thing up in about 15 minutes. It was all magnets. It was truly, I'd never seen that before. I don't know if my DB36 would work with magnets, but this 6-element did. And we had some pretty strong winds. Like I said, it was 20 to 30 miles an hour most of the time. Again, this is just a picture of Andreas's operating station. I want to talk a little bit about our filtering. As you noticed, all those VDAs were really close to each other. So we use these low band systems, high-powered filters. They're 2,500 watt filters. These black boxes here are fans that ran all the time. On the left side is the station. So each of these coax cables are labeled S1 through S5 or S6. I don't remember. I think it was S5. And it's station 1 through station 5. So if you are on station 1 and you want to operate 10 meters, you just find S1 here, pick the filter and the band that you want to operate and plug it in. On the back side, which is the output to the antenna, it's already fixed because we had dedicated antennas for each. So to change bands, you basically had to find your station number and plug it into the right filter. And the other important thing is if there was a coax already plugged in here, you know someone's using it because there were 5 ops, 5 stations. If something's plugged in, you definitely don't want to unplug it. We've had that happen on other expeditions with 1,500 watts and somebody pulls the plug. Again, this filter board was built by Walt, prefabricated. When we got on the island, we had to bolt all these filters to the board, connect power, and have it operate. Again, another view of the VDAs. They were also built by Walt, custom built. And another shot of, the reflector, lots of birds. So the 20-meter VDA is a little bit different in the sense that it's too big to put on a fiberglass pole. So we built, this is the driven element, and this is the reflector behind it. Works in the same fashion. Dave, WD5COV, built this. He calls it the Top Man Express. It was really a fantastic antenna. We made over 2,000 Qs also into Europe at the top of the solar cycle. It performed very, very well. DX Engineering helped model this antenna. So it was about a 75-foot antenna with a very long top hat plus a stinger on top. of that. So it worked really well. And one of the things that Dave did was he built it on a falling derrick, using the falling derrick. So this antenna could be, and here's the sort of the boom that you just basically pull and the antenna just rises. One person can raise this 160-meter antenna on its own. So he guides it, it's on the ground, we build it, we guy it, and one person can just pull it up. And here's a close look at the radials. We had 4 or 5 radials, super thin wire. I think these were 22 gauge. It worked really well. What was really surprising to me was the amount of man-made pollution on this island. Everywhere, every square meter of this island is filled primarily with plastic. Tons and tons and tons of plastic everywhere. Unbelievable amounts of human sort of. On a good note, we had our friend, well, I won't say who it was. We had one of my teammates developed a very, very nasty infection on his ankle. He had only brought 1 pair of shoes with him on the island, and they were extremely uncomfortable because they're rubbing against his sore. He found some matching, I don't know what you call these, clogs or Crocs. So he found some matching Crocs, and he basically spent the entire expedition walking around with his green and black Crocs. Very fashionable. We made about 114,000 cues, 21% uniques. The breakdown was almost 50% of it was North America. Well, we're almost off the coast of Mexico, right? I'd expect the US to have most of the contacts, followed by Europe with a 30% of the percentage of the cues, and Asia being less. I think the numbers for Asia were probably a lot lower because our VDAs, which are directional, were pointed towards the northeast. Japan is almost to the northwest. And so I think they were sort of off the sides of the Yagi or the VDAs. And then the rest of the world, South America, Oceania, and Africa, as expected. These are traditionally the numbers you'll see on an expedition. I wanted to point out a couple things. For those of you who don't know CW, our most contacts were FT8, which is about 50% of our total queues, followed by 30,000 contacts on CW. So if you don't know CW, you are losing out big time because it's another big possibility to get a slot, followed by SSB at 25,000 queues. Look at this number down here. 364 in the last 100 minutes on FT8. This is the rate on FT8. Crazy, crazy numbers. And this latest version that we are about to release, I think we're going to have with the Super Fox, it's running full 5 streams with 2 people in each slot. It's going to be extremely impressive. But these numbers, 400 queues an hour, 1 station. These are essentially by day. I won't bore you. When we first started, I guess we're down here. When we first started, we only had a couple stations running, 2,000 queues. But look at this. 5 stations, and we're pulling in 18,000 queues a day. It was really an amazing experience. It was just nonstop. You'd sit down and you don't know where those 4 hours went because they're just coming at you as fast as you could possibly decode. Again, the real star of the show was the Starlink. I think it's a game changer, allowing real-time uploads of the log, the wildlife, ton of birds, different types of birds. You'd often see these baby chicks. It's, what's the phrase, dog eat dog? I think it's bird eat bird. These things are amazing, the amount of carnage that we saw where the baby chicks would kill their sibling, just naturally because they want to survive. So it's kind of pretty brutal to see. Or parents, if one parent has left their chick alone, the neighboring parent will come over and kill it. So there was a lot of that. So here's a baby booby bird, and another image of that. We've got brown boobies, brown-footed boobies. I mean, it was lots and lots of wildlife. This particular bird was one that was right by our camp that we thought would never survive. The mother or father, I'm not sure which, would leave for days at a time. It's 100 degrees. And this chick is out there in the sand with essentially no protection. But this little bird survived. And truly, truly amazing to see. But again, the crabs, I did want to talk a little bit about the research that came out of this. We were warned about, we basically brought fencing to put around all of our tents because we were warned there were millions and millions of crabs. When we show up, we didn't see that many crabs. We did see rats, but not many crabs. It turned out that a year prior, there was a big hurricane that went directly over Clipperton Island. Now, the birds survive because they can get up and fly away, right? The chicks maybe not so much, but the birds do come back and lay new eggs. But the scientists believe the reason there were very few rats was that the hurricane basically drowned them all. Remember, it's 10 to 12 feet above water, the highest point. It would have just wiped out, the entire colony of rats. And so that was some of the hypothesis of their experiment. Lots of remnants of a time gone by when a lot of people came to the island to mine the guano. And there are also remnants of shells. In 2016, the French Navy basically removed the largest caliber cannon ammunition that was abandoned after World War II. There was a U.S. frigate during the war that accidentally landed on Clipperton, and they're trying to get the ship free, so they dumped the ammunition on the beach. And for the longest time, some of these expeditioners would hear explosions as these shells would just go off. The other thing that was fascinating, drug boats. This engine was brand new, $150,000 a pop for these engines, brand new engines. And so we found probably 3 or 4 of them. No crew. We were expecting to see some dead bodies, but there was none to be found. So I'm not sure how these things landed. They were built in Colombia. They actually had a manufactured little stamp. And anyway, that was quite the journey. And the day that we came home, as we were approaching San Diego, we were greeted to the most amazing sunrise ever. These are some of our corporate sponsors. Big hand. I can't tell you enough about DX Engineering. They are truly to be thanked for all of the stuff they do for amateur radio. So if you guys have an opportunity to buy from them, please buy from them. They're not, you don't go there to save money, but they do so much for us. They supplied us with our miles and miles of coax, even on expeditions that I do. They are to be thanked. And here's our individual clubs. We had over 3,700 individuals donate, 73 premier sponsors. A lot of people donated to help make this come through, and a bunch of clubs. And again, you can't thank enough to Tim. You guys got your QSL cards pretty quick. And our pilots around the world. Obviously, our Shogun crew, the captain, his name was Rambo, and the name was very fitting. You don't mess with Rambo. And here's Dustin, our chef. But really a wonderful, wonderful group, folks. And this is Nadir, who was EEY8MM, basically published a book. And you can, 239 pages of photographs with his 35 millimeter. And so you can get them on Amazon. Okay, so this is our QSL card. And with that, I wanted to thank all of you for making this happen, because without your contributions and donations, it cost each of us, I think, $16,000. just for a seat at the table on this expedition. I'd do it again.